There's been a lot of speculation about a Donkey Kong game coming to the Nintendo Switch. We've heard rumors for a couple of years now, and in these last couple of weeks specifically, everything seems to have kind of come to a head. There's a lot of new information, and I wanted to sit down and compile that into a nice easy video so everyone can understand exactly what's been going on. The only way we're going to figure out what's going on with these rumors, where does it all start, and what's the truth behind them is to look at the history surrounding them. So we're better to start than in the past. No, that's way too far. No, still too far. Bring it close.
Then there's Chunky. He's dead.
Alright, that's ridiculous. That's not even canon. In February of 2014, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze is released on the Wii U. Sometime in mid to late 2014, Retro Studios begins development on a new IP. In April 2015, the Super Smash Bros. Fighter Ballot begins. In June 2015, Retro posts a tweet suggesting that they will appear in the Nintendo E3 Direct. At E3 2015, Retro's game is pulled from the E3 Direct. It's not showcased to the public. In that same E3 Direct, Nintendo reveals that Donkey Kong and Bowser will receive Amiibo Skylander hybrid figures that can be used in Skylanders Superchargers. So after the E3 Direct, things become a little bit more fuzzy. We know that Nintendo's unhappy with Retro's game. They wanted to give a little bit of time to Retro Studios to try to figure out exactly what they were going to do. And once it became evident that they were going to move forward with their new IP, they kind of start looking for other ideas of how to move forward with Donkey Kong and Metroid. Because the studio could have always defaulted back to making either Donkey Kong Country 3, or 6 I guess, or making Metroid Prime 4, which they decided not to do because the studio was kind of tired of remaking older Nintendo games. We don't know what happened to Retro's original IP. It's never been showcased. The best we have is this photo that's up on the screen of looks like a robot in an image that they gave to Reggie when he left Nintendo. It's like very weird. We don't really know what happened. We do know that soon after this, the game was canceled, so we'll never see it unless someone uncovers development stuff that is not released to the public and would be Nintendo property. But eventually they are put on work to port Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze to the Switch. Hayo reports in the podcast that they wanted to use King K. Rool as a secret boss for Tropical Freeze, but were vetoed by Nintendo. They also did Metroid Prime Remastered in the meantime, which released this year. And we still don't know, or haven't even seen Metroid Prime 4 since they announced they were restarting development. That's where Retro's at right now, and they kind of bow out from this point on. In October of 2015, the Fighter Ballot ends. Nintendo counts up the votes. They release Bayonetta as the quote-unquote winner for Smash 4. She won in like Europe or something. It was a really weird way that they did it. We'll later find out that Sora is the character that won the ballot overall. King K. Rool did very well in the Fighter Ballot, something I'm not surprised with, especially if you look at accounts like Kremlin Campaigner, for example. Mainly Miyamoto and like some of the younger devs that grew up with Donkey Kong Country, they start pushing for this idea to bring Donkey Kong back home. And Nintendo is kind of shocked because they didn't expect, Donkey Kong to be a particularly big series. It hasn't been since the N64. This takes them by a storm, and it's actually the reason why King K. Rool wasn't allowed to be a secret boss in the Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze port. It's because they wanted him for Smash Brothers. So sometime in 2016, Vicarious Visions and Nintendo come together and decide to make a 3D Donkey Kong game. Based on how impressed Nintendo was with Vicarious Visions' implementation of Donkey Kong in Skylanders, a character they specifically chose because, hasn't really been in a 3D game in a long time, and there really weren't plans for a new one. So that kind of like worked out really well, and they're like, hey, let's make a Donkey Kong game. Hayo from DK Vine reveals that this was a Donkey Kong Country game in a 3D style. So it was going to be a new take on it, similarly to like Returns, how that was a brand new take on an existing formula, but it was going to be a Donkey Kong Country game. It wasn't going to be like a Jungle Beat scenario where they kind of reboot everything. The game would have centered around this idea of kinetic gameplay, which he describes as being heavily based on exploration and travel, specifically using vines. So that swinging on vines, or he talks about like grinding on vines like they do in Sonic Adventure 2 Battle, for example, And an anecdote comes out of that Miyamoto reportedly saw that and was like, that's really cool, but wouldn't that hurt Donkey Kong's feet? So Vicarious Visions goes off and adds like banana peel shoes for Donkey Kong to use, so he won't hurt his feet. And Miyamoto's like ecstatic about this, which is a really funny detail to add in there, but also gives so much validity because we know that Miyamoto has done this before. Heil, in that same podcast, talks about how the Donkey Kong blowing on like things in the level from Donkey Kong Country Returns was a Miyamoto idea. Donkey Kong slapping the ground was a Miyamoto idea, and he's done this for like various other things. It's kind of his role at Nintendo at this point to supervise game development and to give ideas. So that seems very, very much in character for him. This was also very specifically backed up by Nintendo Prime in his podcast. He says it almost verbatim what Heil says here, so we're getting at least two sources on this. So Heil does go a little bit further into what the game would have been. So the game was supposed to be around the plot of a factory opening up somewhere. I'm assuming it's Donkey Kong Island, just like the jungles that DK is in. Someone would have opened a factory. In the process of doing that, they would have dammed a river, so it was stopping the flow of the water, and that would have caused environmental damage to the jungle, and DK would stop them to save the jungle. Nintendo apparently gave notes to Vicarious Visions here, saying, well, Donkey Kong's not really an altruistic hero, so like, why would he get involved? You guys need to give him a specific reason to get involved, which is very funny and also a very Nintendo thing. Like, for example, I don't remember who it was. Maybe it was Retro Studios, I'm not 100% sure. But they pitched the idea of like having Samus do actual bounty hunting in one of the games, and Nintendo kind of flipped. Because despite calling Samus a bounty hunter this entire time, they didn't really know what that was, and had a completely different viewpoint of Samus than I think most Western fans have of her, which I think is very funny. But again, it's in line with what Nintendo would do. So to give that more selfish reason for DK to get involved, they had it so banana trees would be affected, and so, you know, DK's primary goal was to get as many bananas as possible. So now he's involved because banana trees are dying. He also notes that other aspects of Donkey Kong Country would have made their way into here. Specifically, Diddy Kong would have been in the game, although he would have been like Donkey Kong Country Returns, not so much like the original games. He would have been like probably a jetpack or something on DK's back, but he was in the game from the get-go. Rambi was also going to be in the game as a rideable animal buddy. Heil says that he's the only one that he was told about. It's possible that there were more, or it's also possible that Vicarious Visions just never got that far into development to put like On Guard or anybody else in there. There was also conversations within Vicarious Visions about having the Kremlings come back and be the people behind the factory, but that was never decided on internally at the studio. It was never pitched to Nintendo, so we have no idea if Nintendo would have even okayed that, or if they would have wanted them to make a new villain, but it was discussed. And the last big thing that both Heil and Nintendo Prime, I believe, talked about as well, was that Pauline would have been a playable character in this game. Now, Heil specifies that she only would have been playable in very specific segments, like not the entire game, and that they were going back to the original Donkey Kong arcade game and completely redesigning this character to fit into the Donkey Kong universe. He describes her as being like a Jane Goodall type, so essentially a human living amongst a pack of apes and becoming like kind of a part of their family and studying them, that kind of thing, and trying to protect them through like environmentalist means. So that's like the role she would have played in that. But again, this is a complete redesign. This would have been original and is unrelated to her appearance in Super Mario Odyssey, at least, you know, on the grounds of like what we know. This happened before Mario Odyssey released, so it has nothing to do with her being in that game. Heil is not sure how long the game was in development, but he speculates that it was about 1 or 2 years, maybe 1.5, somewhere around that time. And the game was eventually canceled due to a multitude of factors. You know, some stuff including the founders, It could have been Activision, it could have been Vicarious Visions wanting to work on something else, but ultimately the game was canceled, and he makes the specific note, which I think is very important, that Nintendo was not part of that decision. If it was up to Nintendo, the game would have continued development and it would have released on the Switch. They had never intended to cancel the game, so that was completely on Activision internally, which from whoever made the decision inside that company has nothing to do with Nintendo. So we don't know if this happened before or after the cancellation of the game officially, but Karthik and Guha Bala announced that they're leaving the studio. These are the two brothers who founded the studio when they were still in high school and have been with it this entire time. In June of 2016, during their E3 press conference, Sony announces that Vicarious Visions, or more specifically Activision is what they say, but Vicarious Vision ends up being the one to work on it, is working on a Crash Bandicoot revival that will be a timed exclusive for the PlayStation, and they also announced that Crash Bandicoot is coming to Skylanders Imaginators, the follow-up to Skylanders Superchargers that is developed by Toys for Bob, who will go on to develop Crash 4. I'm also going to include the speculated date of September 2016 as when the game finally ends development. This is speculation by Heil. This is not confirmed. He doesn't even attempt to be like, this is something he heard. This is purely speculation based off of other things Vicarious Visions was doing and just trying to line things up. So we don't know for officially, but for now I think this is a fine place to put it in, as long as you remember that this is speculation. In November of 2016, the Bala brothers form a new studio called Velen Studios, and the first game they actually end up working on is Mario Kart Live Home Circuit for the Nintendo Switch. So clearly, to some degree, the Bala brothers were the people, fostering this close relationship with Nintendo, and it makes sense that once they left the studio, the Donkey Kong game ended up falling apart. Whether the falling apart was the reason they left, or if it happened after they left, we don't know for sure. But, clearly, from working on Skylanders all the way to working on Mario Kart, they have an interest in working with Nintendo, and they seem to have an interest in working with, toys that work with video games, because that's the immediate thing they worked on for Mario Kart. I know it's not exactly Toys to Life, but it's a similar concept. In December of 2016, Activision announces that Vicarious Visions would work on Destiny 2. So we know for sure that the Donkey Kong game at this point has been cancelled. Now we jump an entire year later to June 2017, when Crash Bandicoot N. Sane Trilogy is released for the PlayStation. In September of 2017, Vicarious Visions' other game comes out, Destiny 2 is released. At some unknown time in either late 2017 or early 2018, Nintendo decides that they're going to develop their own Donkey Kong game at Nintendo EPD, which is Nintendo's internal development studios. It's one studio officially, but there's multiple different teams. So these are the guys that work on the Mario games and the Mario Kart games and Animal Crossing and Splatoon and ARMS, but these are all segmented different teams. So the Mario team is one group, the Animal Crossing team is a completely different group working simultaneously on a game. Even though it's been reported multiple times that the Mario Odyssey team is working on this, it doesn't seem to be true. What seems to be happening is that the Mario Odyssey team is split up. Younger staff are going to work on Donkey Kong in a new EPD group that we just don't know about yet because they haven't officially released any games, and that the veterans are staying to work on Mario. In May of 2018, Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze is released for the Nintendo Switch with the brand new funky mode. In June of 2018, Mario + Rabbids Kingdom Battle Donkey Kong Adventure is announced with Grant Kirkhope working on the music. I believe this is during Ubisoft's E3 press conference. In August 2018, King K. Rool is announced as a new fighter for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now again, jumping forward quite a bit, in January of 2021, Activision announces that Vicarious Visions is going to be merged into Blizzard. They go under a different name, there's some sort of subsidiary of Blizzard, and they just help Blizzard with development. So there's no hope for anything coming out of them ever again because they're stuck working on Blizzard. In May of 2021, we get what I could find as our first leak towards this Donkey Kong Switch game from YouTuber Lonely Goomba, who posts on Twitter that a 3D Donkey Kong game is in development, coming to the Nintendo Switch, and that it's being developed by the Super Mario Odyssey team. So after Lonely Goomba tweets his original post, Zippo, another infamous leaker, let's say, piggybacks off of that, saying that it was a 2D Donkey Kong game, not a 3D game. It was being developed by Nintendo EPD, and that the game was supposed to release in 2022 to celebrate Donkey Kong's 40th anniversary. They noted that characters from the Country series would be in it, but that this was not a Donkey Kong Country game, it was an original game. We can 100% confirm that Zippo was lying, or at least had bad information, because it's currently 2023 when you're watching this video. Well, at least when I'm recording it, I don't know when you're watching it. But as I'm recording this video, it's 2023, and we did not get any such Donkey Kong game even announced. So I think it's safe to say that this information is false, but it does play a role in the larger story that we're trying to tell here. So both those tweets go out, and news outlets start reporting on it. Specifically, we're going to use Nintendo Life for this video, and they report on both those tweets talking about this supposed Donkey Kong game coming to the Switch. At this point, Heil from DK Vine, who I've mentioned a couple times, he is like, think of like Joe Merrick for the Pokemon community. He's kind of like that for the Donkey Kong community. So he comes out and he's like, hey, there's a lot of leaks going on. I need to clear these things up. I know what's happening. And he makes a podcast from his series, The Conversation, over at DK Vine. He originally said he didn't want to put this information out there because he didn't want to give anybody like false hope or set up expectations for something that wasn't going to happen, because you know how leaks are on the internet and how quickly, you know, that fire builds. But since everything was out there anyways, he figured it would be appropriate for him to talk about it at this point. In September 2021, Nintendo announces in partnership with Illumination the Super Mario Bros. Movie. Later trailers would show that Donkey Kong, played by Seth Rogen, would play a major role in this film, alongside Cranky Kong, and even cameos from Diddy Kong, Dixie Kong, Chunky Kong, and Swanky Kong. Nintendo also announces alongside Universal Studios in September of 2021 that a Donkey Kong expansion is coming to the Super Nintendo World area of Universal Studios Japan, which is expected to open in 2024. This had been rumored for a while at this point, but they officially announced it. I think there's even, like, you can see like designs of the area around the time that the Mario one was announced. So it's been something that they've been working on for a while. Construction has started on it. There's a bunch of stuff going on right now. You can look up photos online, but this is supposedly going to open next year. So we'll see how that goes. In November of 2021, rumors start spreading about a follow-up or a spin-off of Illumination's Mario Brothers movie focused on Seth Rogen's Donkey Kong. As of right now, we still don't know if that's going to culminate into anything, but, you know, it's heavily rumored that we will be getting a movie with Seth Rogen's Donkey Kong as the main character. This wouldn't be surprising, considering again how much the character seems to be a focus in the Mario movie. In January of 2022, prominent insider Nate the Hate discussed during a podcast that he did hear about a Donkey Kong game coming to Nintendo Switch, but he specifically says that he's not sure if it's 2D or 3D. He's heard that it's in development. So that's our background into everything leading up to this month, where things have exploded. The first thing that happened this month is that a leaker that goes by Professor Chops made a post on Family Boards about this alleged Donkey Kong game. He's the one who said that the confusion from this game, whether it's 2D or 3D, is stemming from the fact that these are two different games. One is a game in development currently at Nintendo EPD. We don't know anything about this game. Nobody knows anything about it. All we know is that it exists. The other game was canceled. It was a 3D game being developed by Vicarious Visions. Professor Chops kind of just says that he's gotten this information from like DK Vine forums and stuff like that. This information existed online before. Heil said a very similar thing in his podcast, his first podcast about this subject. So apparently this was at least to some degree known information, but this is where it kind of starts and blows up for most people who aren't in tune with the Donkey Kong community. So a YouTuber by the name of Nintendo Prime reports on this leak, and a couple days later in a podcast on his channel, he talks about how he's seen footage of this game. Nintendo Prime is actually the one who said the name Donkey Kong Freedom for the first time. He described essentially the same thing Heil had said in his podcast about like Donkey Kong grinding on vines like Tarzan, using the bananas, the Miyamoto stuff. He said all of that stuff. And during that podcast, a friend of his, I'm assuming, who was on there, named Mike Odyssey, goes on to YouTube and he types in Donkey Kong Freedom and he pulls up a trailer for a game and he shows it to Nintendo Prime being like, is this what you're talking about? Because this is clearly a fan game. And Nintendo Prime's like, no, that's not what I'm talking about. He goes on this story about it being like the kid of one of the developer's friends that made a game in dreams based on it. That it was very strange. He later retracted a lot of this stuff on Fama boards and said, I think I might have just been tricked. But, you know, it seems pretty clear now that whether or not he was shown footage of the actual game or if someone just duped him by showing him, a fan game, we may never know. But clearly, the information he got is true because it's backed by DK Vine, and there does seem to have been a game called, at least at some point, Donkey Kong Freedom at Vicarious Visions that will never be released. So this Nintendo Prime podcast sparks even more stuff, and news outlets like comicbook.com start posting about this like 3D Donkey Kong game for Vicarious Visions that was canceled and all this other stuff, that just rumors out the wazoo. So I started my research at this point, and I wanted to look up what was going on with this Donkey Kong Freedom thing because it seemed weird that Nintendo Prime would have that information. I looked up the trailer, I watched the trailer, it was clearly a Dreams fan game. So I went online, looked up the Donkey Kong Freedom in Dreams, and I got to an account on Dreams called Croconut Games. I look up Croconut Games on Twitter, and I could confirm that they are the same person who made the fan game, because they have an original game called, I think it's Leon Lionheart, and it's up on both things. So I go and I find their founder on their Twitter. I go to his personal Twitter, which I'm not going to reference because I don't know if he wants that out there. But I go to his Twitter and I kind of see, like, does he seem to know anything about this? And at that point, I'm at a dead end because I don't really know how to confirm anything about that. But it becomes weird because the account then posts a video the next day saying that, yeah, no, Nintendo Prime is right. I base this off the Donkey Kong Freedom game that I learned about. And we're like, okay, I guess that's a real thing then. But then Nintendo Prime posts a retraction of some sort being like, I might have been fooled by this, I'm not 100% sure. And then a couple days later, DK Vine posts a second podcast talking about this, confirms the Donkey Kong Freedom stuff entirely, and specifically references Croconut Games' founder as someone who did independent research and discovered that this game existed and made a fan game based off of it in Dreams. This was days of me looking stuff up to try to figure this out, and DK Vine proved it all true within minutes on this podcast. So shout out to Heil, because that was some crazy stuff for that 2 or 3 days for anyone who's really paying attention to it. And then, of course, like I said, as I'm doing research into this, Heil posts on the DK Vine Twitter that they're going to make a podcast episode about this and reveal information that they didn't reveal in their first podcast a few years ago. The image they use is Donkey Kong from Skylanders, so clearly like referencing Vicarious Visions. Heil even said in his first podcast that an outside studio was developing the game immediately after referencing Skylanders. So clearly, even though he didn't feel like it was okay for him to say something at the time, for whatever reason, maybe, someone's job could have been lost or whatever, he was clearly aware at that point what was going on and was even referencing it very obviously, in my opinion. Go to a couple days ago where DK Vine releases the Conversation episode 1107, which, oh boy, congrats to you guys, because I don't know how I would even do that. And this is like the thing that reveals all the information, confirms what Nintendo Prime's been saying, confirms Professor Chops' leak, and puts it all out there that yes, there was this 3D Donkey Kong game in development for the Switch, it was canceled, and now Nintendo was working on something else that we don't know about, that we'll probably see for the next Switch based on, I think, what Professor Chop said. But, they could change that at any point. So now that we have all the information, I just want to speculate a bit on this entire concept. Obviously, we don't know if Nintendo EPD is working on a 2D or a 3D game. We have no idea, and I want to make that very clear that we don't know. Just because Vicarious Visions was working on a 3D game doesn't mean that Nintendo is. So I don't want to, hype responsibly. I don't want anybody to go out there and be like, we're going to get a 3D Donkey Kong game as a launch title for the whatever the next console is. I don't think that that's a smart position to put yourself in, because if that doesn't happen, you're going to be tremendously disappointed with whatever that happens. Now, is Nintendo actually working on a Donkey Kong game? In my opinion, even without all of this rumor stuff, it's pretty obvious that they are. King K. Rool coming back in Super Smash Bros., okay, you could write that off as fan service. However, Nintendo is spending, I can't even imagine how much money to make a movie and a theme park. And what do they decide to follow those? Okay, Mario, first choice, easy. What do they follow up with? Donkey Kong. That's a weird choice. Donkey Kong is not an A-list Nintendo franchise currently. He used to be, back in the Super Nintendo and arguably the N64 era, he was absolutely an A-list character. But nowadays, he doesn't rank very high. Tropical Freeze wasn't like this big system seller or anything. It was on a console that failed horribly. And yet, that's who they choose. Not The Legend of Zelda, especially after Breath of the Wild being, tremendously popular. They don't choose, Kirby or Splatoon, which is another, breakout hit. No, they go with Donkey Kong, very specifically. To me, that's enough evidence that they're working on something. They have to be. There's too much fire for there not to be smoke. When we're going to see this, I don't know. If I have to throw in my 2 cents, I do think it's going to be a 3D game. Because if we look at, Kirby Forgotten Land, that did really, really well. And, I think Nintendo understands at this point that people do want those big games. Not that people don't like 2D games. I would be fine with another 2D Donkey Kong game. But I think if you really want to make an impression with a franchise right now and you want to push it to new people, the way that they very clearly seem to want to do, you have to make a statement with a 3D game. I also think there's some interesting DNA going on here with Mario Odyssey. Because Pauline being chosen by Vicarious Visions to be a playable character without any knowledge of what was going on in Mario Odyssey, mind you, because Nintendo would have not disclosed that information to them. I think, even though, again, this is speculation, I think it's possible that Vicarious Visions brought up the idea and Nintendo was like, oh, that's a really good idea to bring back Pauline. And then when that game got out, was canceled, right? And that idea was gone. Nintendo was like, well, we should use this in our game. And that New Donk City might even exist as a reference to Vicarious Visions game to some degree, right? I mean, obviously, we don't know for sure, but it is interesting that Pauline, of all people, was brought back seemingly at random, because there's not really any reason for her to make that revival in 2017. It's not impossible that those two things were unrelated and it was just parallel thinking, but it's very interesting timeline-wise how that works out. And again, maybe it was a parallel thing. Maybe it has nothing to do with that and that, it was a happy accident, but it is a little weird. I also think this could kind of be the reason why we haven't seen Mario Odyssey 2. It's been very strange that there's been nothing for Mario Odyssey. We got the Luigi balloon stuff, but we didn't get any big DLC with extra kingdoms and stuff, which everybody wanted. And we did get stuff like that for Breath of the Wild, and now Breath of the Wild sequel is coming out in about a month, and we still don't know anything about a Mario Odyssey sequel. I think Nintendo was hedging their bets that there was going to be a big 3D Donkey Kong game to follow up, and that could have acted as a pseudo-sequel for Mario Odyssey, because the game would have released after 2017, right? It would have came out probably around the time Donkey Kong Tropical Freeze came out, if realistically speaking. Maybe a little bit later, I'm not 100% sure. But that might have been what they were counting on to be, sort of the pseudo-sequel to Mario Odyssey 2. So instead of working on Mario Odyssey 2 immediately, They were like, hey, let's get to work on the next Mario game for whatever our next system is, so we can have that ready to go. Because Mario Odyssey being in the launch year for the Switch was a major success for them. I also want to just like stress how important it is that Nintendo decided to develop internally, because there's really not that many franchises that they do that for. People talk about all the time how there's so many like Fire Emblem and Kirby games and Xenoblade games, but people don't get that the reason why that happens is because it's second party developers or third party developers that choose to make those games, not Nintendo. So Monolith Soft makes a Xenoblade game when they want to. They'll come to Nintendo and say, hey, we're going to make Xenoblade Chronicles 3 now. Or we're going to port Xenoblade Chronicles. And Nintendo needs to okay it, sure, but they're the ones who decide. Same thing with Fire Emblem. Same thing with Kirby. So when you ask questions like, oh, why isn't there any new Donkey Kong game? It's because Retro Studios didn't want to work on it. If Retro Studios wanted to put that out as the next game, it would have came out. But they chose to work on something else. So Donkey Kong didn't have a developer. That's the reason why we haven't seen a new F-Zero. That's the reason why Metroid took so long to come back. It's just because they're not developed internally. The only series that they develop internally is Mario, Mario Kart, Animal Crossing, Splatoon, Zelda, and like Pikmin. There's a couple of other things too, but those are the big ones. And that's why when you look at like the Nintendo Tokyo branding, those are the characters they reference, because those are the characters that are in-house Nintendo characters. You know, Fire Emblem is not an in-house Nintendo series. It's a Nintendo franchise. Nintendo owns it, but Intelligent Systems are really the people working behind that one, not Nintendo. So Donkey Kong being added to that roster, or I guess more correctly, re-added to that roster, is absolutely huge news. Especially if it's a new EPD studio being created for this, and that Donkey Kong is going to be an A-list series again. And Nintendo's putting a lot of money and a lot of force behind this, and I think it's really good, especially if it's true that younger devs are the ones internally pushing this. And I'm assuming we'll hear from it fairly soon. I don't think that the Switch has that much longer to be Nintendo's primary system. I think after we move past Zelda, you can start looking to a announcement of a new console. That's my opinion, at least. So that is the history behind these Donkey Kong rumors and like what's been going on in the past couple of years with Donkey Kong, why we haven't seen a new game in a while, and a bit of speculation from me here at the end. I want to thank everybody for watching. You know, this is kind of a departure from what I usually do here, but since I've been gone, I have a history degree now, so I'm trying to use more research and stuff based on that. So I hope to see you guys soon. Thanks for watching. Bye.